Excuse me, all right, happy St. Patrick's Day. Welcome to the March 17th Government Operations Committee meeting. We have missed two meetings due to scheduling conflicts and time constraints. Can I get a meeting approval for the meeting minute from December 9th?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The December 9th meeting minutes are approved. Today we got two items to discuss, mainly one, and it's the LBAs. Kick it off to Mr. Andrews.
Yes, sir. So in our last meeting, we were in the home stretch of what a land bank authority could and could not do. Really recognizing that the most benefits that it offers is maybe more nimble acquisition and disposition of property than you get out of just the unified government. And that largely should be used for tackling blight and dilapidated properties, but could also be used creatively in things like creating or making those properties available for affordable housing, and possibly maybe is helpful in heirs property issues. And following that, y'all asked for some more information about Athens-Clarke County properties and also the other types of properties that the Land Bank Authority might be active in. Most notably, how many sales from the tax commissioner had not been completed in recent history. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And so what I have here to begin with is, let me see if I can, this is the unduplicated list from the tax commission. So these are sales going back nearly a decade, and these are where no bid was tendered. This is shorter than what was shared with you via email, A, because I've removed duplication, and two, because the last two lots on there that were noted for a December sale did in fact sell according to our tax records. So you'll see here 7 different properties that are currently within the purview of the tax commissioner, i.e. they have back taxes, they've been offered up for sale a few times, and they have not been able to successfully sell. Of these, doing some kind of desktop level analysis, 2 of them are possible candidates for infill. Those would be the property at 105 Sartain and 221 East Meadow Drive. They both have good road frontage. They have dimensions that seem to support a lot of record that could be used to develop an infill house. And so one of them you'll see is actually associated with nuisance abatement and has $35,000. So that's the lien that is applied after public funds are used to address some kind of public nuisance, which is usually kind of a condemned structure. The other sites that you see here are all lots, but upon preliminary review are not really buildable. So most often they do not have road frontage or any kind of public access. So at best, there's maybe an easement or some kind of prescription, but they're going to be legally challenging there. There's one that just simply has an unbuildable dimension. It's not wide enough or deep enough to support a structure. And then one of them has a deeded utility right of way across a majority of the parcel. So if you think about what we've talked about with other land banks, the land bank could still play a role here, but that role would be that side lot disposition. So it would actually be taking this into their care and then working with neighboring property owners to transfer it to them and incorporate it into one of their existing lots of record to make it larger. But overall, across the last decade, just not what I would call a target-rich environment. If we jump for a second, it's also important to say that there are 5 properties that the land bank currently has title to, even though it's been dormant. And so you can see kind of their addresses here. And again, they're somewhat color coded. So there's 2 really good candidates for infill and maybe affordable housing. One is at 110 Alterstone Drive. That's over in the Stonehenge neighborhood. And the other is 300 Bailey Street. It's actually north of the North Oconee Water Reclamation Facility. I've personally walked this property. It may actually be a candidate for what we would call a minor subdivision. So you may be able to get two or more lots out of the one existing lot. Because it is RS5 zoning, if I recall correctly. Two other properties that they have. So one is Derby Street. It's at the intersection of Derby and Branch. Possibly could do some affordable housing or other types of housing there, although the topography is a little more challenging. So you're either looking at a significant amount of grading and perhaps a retaining wall, or more likely a basement style home. And then these last two, I would say, are very much interrelated. So 155 and 195 Woodridge Circle. 155 Woodridge has a portion of a deeded utility right-of-way that cuts across it. 195 is almost entirely that right-of-way. So more than likely, if these are going to be used, they're going to be combined into a single lot. Generally, you can put something like a driveway across that right-of-way, but you would not put a structure, fences, things of that nature. So on the books, you're basically looking at four candidates, and I will note that they have some generous tax assessed value, which could be used to seed land bank operations. But I just want to remind you that if the goal here is to really focus on affordable housing, then you're not usually selling these lots at market. You're going to be greatly marking them down so you can make development cheaper, and then in return, that developer, whether they be for-profit or nonprofit, is making commitments about the affordability of a for sale house, fee simple, or as a rental. Any questions about those before we look at county ownership?
Go back to the two properties on Sartain. Are they right there? I guess they got two different lots. We got 105. So the reason I'm asking, there's two different prices.
So Sartain, so what it is when you see duplications, that is the lowest price for the same parcel is the most recent amount due. And that's why I deduplicated them, is when they're up for auction 1 year, it might be 6,000 is due. And so that's the minimum bid. And if there's no sale and then they're auctioned again the next year, it might be 7,000 is due because they have another year of taxes.
Okay. So stuff that's in green, light green,
Mm-hmm.
those are possibly buildable. You can build on those lots.
From a desktop analysis, so looking at GIS, looking at the frontage, utility presence, and the topography, preliminary indications are that they should be buildable. Certainly before money is exchanged, I would encourage somebody to go walk the property.
And then one more, Patrick. So right now, in our land bank, just saying we got some properties.
We have 5 properties in the land bank, 4 of which probably have some use. So another thing you asked us to look at was county ownership. And so we shared with you 2 maps. One is this ACC Gov owned map, and you can see it here. I can zoom in and out, but a couple of notable features. So you see a decent amount of green here. But when you start to dive into it, what you're going to find is, so this section here is the Sandy Creek Greenway and Cooks Trail. So that has years of SPLOST and grant funded contributions. Over here, this big section is the airport. Here you have the landfill. Down here is the Cedar Creek Water Reclamation Facility and the Rock and Shoals Conservation Area. Beach Haven. So you have a lot of parks here, right? And so it's one of those things that I, like many residents in this town, might put our name into the tax assessor and say, oh my, there's a lot of land that the county owns, and that is factually correct. But when you think about, well, what has not been designated for a purpose, what is not encumbered with deed restrictions, you come down to a much narrower list. And so we sent the second map, and we can zoom in and out or go in and out, but this is based off of work from our budget and strategy department. I've been a part of these going back several years, where literally we just sit down in a room with people that know and say, This lot here, public utilities, is this being used as an aeration pond or some other purpose? And what they did is they figured out which ones were immediately not known. And then additional research was done, and staff in many cases went out to visit in person. And these are the ones that we just don't really have a home for, if you will. So these are ones that I would tell you are generally surplus. And so we can zoom around. Here off of Camelot, you see a rather large ownership. Potentially that could be a further subdivision, although there's going to be some buffer on Turkey Creek. This section here on Mitchell Bridge, I believe, is part of the old bridge alignment. You certainly, that would not be land bank candidate, and maybe not even something you want to dispose of. Going out here near Caterpillar, this is an old oxidation pond. I've also walked this one. It could definitely be mitigated and carved. So right now, if you walked, it would just kind of look like a wetland forest. Like you would not know necessarily what it was used for. Certainly, you could probably get 3+ lots yielded out of that for somebody if it was not in our ownership. And then just other little fragments is really, unfortunately, what it comes down to. So there will be some I want to pull your attention to. These are 4 lots adjacent to the health department. They're actually across the street at the corner of Athens-Clarke and North Harris Street. Now, one of them is being used for parking. We believe they were probably bought for potential expansion of the health department, but we have no reason to believe they're needed at this time for that purpose. So those are certainly valuable lots from even an in-town location if you wanted to create housing. Another one that's always kind of stuck in my radar would be the duplexes off Creekwood Estates. So we actually own two unit duplexes in here. So it's actually 4 bedrooms per duplex, so 8 bedrooms total, if you were. These were used for a long time by Advantage Behavioral. They have CDBG funds behind them, so we would advise you that they should stay within a CDBG purpose, although there probably are some legal mechanisms that you could get past that. It's easy enough to say, well, this could be used for affordable housing or permanent supportive housing if that was wanted. I've been in these structures a number of times, and I'll just tell you, I personally find it frustrating because we're probably at this point the most blighted properties in the neighborhood. We do once a year go in and clean up the landscape to try to maintain that, but we are very close. If these are not disposed of in the next couple of years, you will reach a point where the structures start to fail, like the roofs will start leaking and otherwise, and you'll lose the asset's value. So that's definitely some inventory I would encourage us to look at.
Who's managing that property then?
Nobody. At best, it's central services with some landscape mowing. Now, HCD, I know, has done some work on the prior history and purchase of them, how they came to be what they are, but nobody is using those properties.
And nobody's in there.
Nobody's in there.
So since they have, I don't wanna go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But, well, we may need to. So we own the property.
We own the property.
And CBDG funds are attached to the
I
property.
understand, but I'm trying to figure out. Let me go, how many bedrooms?
8.
8 total across the 2 structures.
So like,
And they are in need of a major remodel. You're probably looking at today's rates at 150 to 200 a unit to get them to be in very nice condition.
But we have a housing strike fund with
That's what I was.
several
that's
million
what-
dollars,
that's what I was
like,
going. Do we
so
take,
like who would
Yeah, who would?
I mean,
manage the
could
property?
we partner with one of our housing partners, Land Trust, Housing Authority, Habitat, and
I was thinking,
That's the rabbit hole I didn't wanna go down.
Yeah.
oh, so Commissioner's main point, even if we don't go with a nonprofit, do we find a possible property developer or property manager that can manage that for us and use the strike fund money to rehab? Again, I'm just throwing
Sure.
ideas out there, but
Well, I'm gonna always advise you that we are not good landlords.
yeah.
So, it is, I would recommend that we put it in the hands of either nonprofit or for-profit. entities. It just matters of how complicated do you want that disposition to be because there were prior CDBG funds in the renovation. We have plenty of records on this, but we get, so I probably get 2 or 3 calls a year from people who want to come buy them. So I have no doubt that there would be some uptake if they were offered. And I'm trying to think of what the last kind of,
So based on what you're showing us, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding it seems like we don't have that much property for an LBA.
no, we don't. So I think on this, there's 40 some odd lots and about 20 of them have some decent potential for being returned to housing. The remainder are predominantly remnants and unusable. And so again, we would love to have a land bank maybe help us with some side lot disposition. But
I know there are some lots in the Rock Springs neighborhood. Are those all encumbered by like floodplain utility stuff?
Yes.
I've gotten some calls. about
yeah,
that.
so most of the Rock Springs is FEMA lots
Yeah,
that were bought out to get homes out of the floodplain. And so they are deed restricted, cannot build on them.
So if we go down this road to LBA, we get dispose of those, we do something with the 20 lots, then what? You know, Athens-Clarke County. So y'all get what I'm going down.
Right.
This is what I talked with Melinda over the weekend, and Athens not that big. So I figured that there were not gonna be a lot of parcels available. I was hoping there'd be more government parcels
Yeah.
available, but I was shocked to read the email this weekend, but if there's 40 lots, but only 20 have decent potential,
Mhm.
and I think we have $5 million
That's right.
in strike fund.
So
You know,
because Athens has a ton of private market uptake, right? So even these 20, the county could declare them surplus and sell them. If that's what, but when you do that, you lose any hope of guiding what happens beyond zoning actions. And this is 20 accumulated over, at least 4 decades. So because Athens has so much private market pressure, in my opinion, and Marquita, you may have other thoughts, an LBA would basically become another competitor in the space. So they can go to tax sales and bid up properties just like you or I could in our own time. What that means is that they're competing against a for-profit entity that would make use of that property one way or another. The question is that premium that they might pay worthwhile to then, if they really had a focus on trying to create affordability or a sense of place?
so explain, okay, dive deeper, I'll unpack that. So if we do an LBA and I'm going up against the mark, got a piece of property, let's call it Marquita, not the mark, let's call it Marquita. Going up against Marquita. So Marquita got, it's trying, LBA and Marquita are fighting or wanting this 2-acre lot. It's assessed value at $300,000. Marquita said, I'm gonna pay $400,000. So the LBA will be, there's no incentive, right? Cause like, if we're looking for affordability, if the LBA buys that property for 455, that property is no longer affordable, correct?
It would basically be the government subsidizing that affordability and then
But we will spend that money for that property at a higher market value. And then how will we subsidize? We just offer the nonprofit incentive to,
So if you think about some of the other communities we've looked at, Macon, Savannah, they have a tremendous number of in-town lots that are struggling with blight. And so they have a lot of, and they don't have maybe such an emphasis on affordability, although they each play in that space. So to some degree, they're churning as a business through those publicly owned properties where they're able to take them and flip them for money and use those revenues to support operations. with what I've shown you here, if you start an LBA, I think you need to be prepared to heavily subsidize it. And then the question is, how much value are they offering over our existing players in that
I
space?
think I mentioned in our last meeting that we may get into a bidding war. Had that land bank, that's what I was concerned about. I don't want to get into a bidding war, possible private entities trying to get property. That's my concern with our land bank. If we do that, there's property that we think is good, may do affordability, but then again, somebody from the private has come in and offered more. Do we want to be, as a government, do we want to be in that position? And to your point, what's gonna be the return,
Yeah,
you know?
how we gonna subsidize, like,
Exactly.
the limited funds we have?
I mean, we have entities, nonprofit entities that are working in the affordable housing space. They're
Right.
certified by the federal government. I feel like, that's where we should be focused. If there are publicly owned properties, we should be focused on transferring them to those entities that will maintain perpetual affordability. That's why I think we should have some of those players at this table.
I agree.
Austin, not to put you on the spot, but my understanding is, let's take those Creekwood duplexes for a minute. Even our nonprofit partners who are really helpful in developing product in the community, we're fairly restricted in our ability to just deed those over, that normally we would need to use something like an authority as an intermediary. Have y'all had a chance to look into that at any point?
I don't believe we've had a chance. Are you saying we would need an authority to redevelop the properties?
No, and this is coming up on some other work I'm doing on our properties. If you look at Georgia code, it allows for a number of dispositions. You can go to government can give land to government, no problem. They can do trades of equal value. We can do a remnant disposition with like a direct sale, and then we can do open auctions. But I think the challenge is if Marquita is my affordable housing partner, if I wanted to make sure that a property, let's say those ones over there off of Harris Street, great in-town location, good access to community services. If I wanted to make sure that they landed with Marquita, I have to go through like a quasi-government board, authority, or commission in order to do that.
So like the government couldn't just give it to Marquita at a lower price, it has to be an authority.
But we could give it to a housing nonprofit, correct?
No, I think we'd have to go through an authority based off of some of what I've seen.
So in the past.
There are like like processes you have to follow for
Okay,
disposition
yeah.
of publicly owned land.
Right.
So I think we still have to adhere to that, I would think. But
We go through those processes pretty regularly, though.
And that was gonna
with
be
those
my
entities.
question is, could we use an existing authority like a public facilities authority or one of the development authorities to move these properties off our books if this body did not want to create a land bank authority?
Sure. That's something we can definitely look at, do some research and follow up.
I think at this point, because we see how many properties that we had, I think I was a little bit more optimistic, but anywho, this is where we are. And I think that way to go that Andrew was just, I think that would be the way to go. And as far as the strike fund goes, that we allow those funds to be there for entities like our affordable housing nonprofits to apply for those funds to do more affordable housing or rehab to blighted structures. And I think that puts the GOC in a spot where, we can take this to the commission and say, hey, once we get information back from the attorney's office about the process of the transferring of land.
So we have to explain to the full commission that we don't have that much property for that would be adequate for the LBA. But one of their concerns that was charged to us, like, what do we do with those properties for affordability?
Yeah.
So like, even if it's 20, we could do something with it, or.
Yeah. But with those 20 though, saying we transfer all 20 of those properties, possible to Commissioner Taylor's point, to the nonprofit to develop those as affordability. Would that be on the table to us last fall?
It's done legally.
Legally, I mean, would that be something that we might wanna look at?
So I think it's just a matter of how you dispose of them is my understanding. And so a land bank authority provides a known tool to do that. But the question I'm hearing a little bit is, are there other tools that already exist? And really technically the land bank authority exists, it's just super dormant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's really that question of, do you reactivate it for the purposes of moving some inventory out and then know that it's gonna maybe return to a sense of dormancy and not become this competitive player in a
Yeah.
space that's deeply subsidized? Or if there's another avenue, do you just use the other avenue? It really comes down to a little bit of staffing and capacity, right?
Yeah.
Because you're gonna need legal consultations, you're gonna need to be able to do some title research and other things, so.
Can I have something to add, and Marquita and I have been working. So most communities that we've talked to, particularly Macon, Savannah, they have their land bank authority, but it works so closely in cooperation with what they've created, a housing trust fund, affordable housing trust fund. And so Marquita and I've been doing a lot of work to talk to these communities about how those work together. And a lot of communities are essentially using their land bank to acquire properties, right? And then transferring those into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for purposes of getting into the hands of affordable housing developers. And so that, I think, that seems to be the model right now, particularly in towns that are similar to ours in Georgia.
So I said, let's reactivate.
So we
Okay.
reactivate and
So our experience, or what we're learning is that a land bank authority would probably have pretty limited use on its own in a town like this, but it would have, good use, right? Or don't you agree, Marquita? Like the combination of a housing trust fund and the land bank authority is sort of the recommended.
So one of our existing other authorities could serve that function as well, correct?
Yes, in some communities, basically, like like a housing authority could certainly serve the role of the housing trust fund. That is how some
But
communities.
the land bank authority, could be served, that function could be served by one of our other development authorities.
I think the land bank, I mean, my understanding is that the land bank authority would need to exist independently, but another authority could be used to sort of acquire the properties from the land bank.
okay.
Land bank sort of brings in all the properties, right, it acquires the properties. And then for purposes of development, could use an existing partner, sure. Absolutely.
And because we only have, a limited amount of properties, once these properties are, say we've, sold them all, what would be the purpose of the land bank moving forward? Would they be like the staff for, say, housing authority would like to use some of the strike fund? Would the land bank serve as like the person who that they would go to get the funds from? Like since the 20 properties are,
I think what we've seen is that the land bank itself is not the tool in which to deploy those affordable housing funds because it's not in their enabling legislation. So I don't know if y'all.
It really is for the purpose of, and Marquita, correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but this is more your wheelhouse than mine for sure. It really is for the purpose of bringing in properties. So people in the community could donate property to the
Right.
land bank authority, for example. They have the ability to accept property by donation as well. And then work with external partners like a housing trust fund or an existing nonprofit or the housing authority to develop those properties.
okay.
So I think it always exists for the purpose of bringing property. I think it's a good tool to bring properties in. Is it a good tool in this community to redevelop properties into affordable housing? Maybe, limited, but in conjunction with the others. Am I getting that right, Marquita?
Yeah, that's right. And so, but I look at land bank authority as, yes, we may have 20 pieces of property that we could look at possibly developing, but we also have to look at it long-term, that there may be other properties that the land bank authority could acquire. They could also, as she said, receive transfers of property
Tax sales.
tax sales. Usually a land bank authority is working with the school district
Okay.
and the tax commissioner, seeking those properties that, you know, haven't been able to be sold. And so in addition to that, land bank authorities then work with developers because, I know I'm going to Make 'em Bibb's Developer Summit, and it's sponsored by the Land Bank Authority, and that's the end of this month, I think March 26th. And so what they do is try to partner with developers on projects that, for properties that they may have. They also work with, other entities to maybe, if they have funds, like a community development, CDIF, you know, if they have funds, they try to collaborate with them and partner with them. And Courtney mentioned our housing trust fund. And so if we seek out a partnership for our entities to utilize those trust funds, they may be able to partner with the developer or partner with the land bank authority on a piece of land to be able to do that. And so they kind of work hand in hand. The land bank authority basically is not gonna replace our affordable housing
Yeah.
partners. It's its own separate entity.
Kind of a holding place.
Yeah.
A holding place
Yeah,
and
property.
larger, bigger things with outside of things that maybe a small nonprofit can do.
Well, and Marquita, I'm gonna try to reflect back on my time with HCD. So if I'm a nonprofit and I see maybe 4 lots over on Harris Street that are privately owned, that are for sale, and I realize, well, I could really do some good work making affordable housing in that space. If I have a CDBG grant that includes acquisition, then I can go make a private transaction and use those funds. Is that correct?
That's correct.
After you checked enough boxes.
That's good.
But if I don't have that grant, or if that grant is being used for other affordable housing purposes, are you aware of any revenue stream right now that would allow them to purchase it other than their own funds?
No.
So where you might see some value add is if I'm a nonprofit player in that space, the land bank might do some acquisition ahead of me. They might go in and negotiate that sale and then hold it for a year until I'm ready to build and then flip it. But again, it's just a roundabout subsidy, somewhat consistent with the investments you all made in the last budget. Because as we've talked about with affordable housing, the cost of the construction itself makes the product unaffordable, right? So you have to get into some level of subsidy. And in this community, we've done that with direct funding like CDBG and ARPA. We've also tried to allow incentives, like the inclusionary zoning ordinance. But if you can't like you've either got to lower cost or increase the development potential of the property. Those are kind of your 2 main levers that you would have. I do want to point out, with the resolution that the attorney's office has helped prepare, if you make a recommendation to reactivate the land bank authority, it does not actually align with dollars going out the door right away, right? It just basically makes this a further fleshed out process. And so what's here is to have the manager direct staff to work with the newly appointed land bank authority to return with an operations and staffing plan. And so that could be where there's this discussion about, well, do we just want to use this as a tool to move some property out? Or is it something that's staffed part-time and they're kind of helping in this space, but maybe this person is a attorney, a real estate agent in their own time, the rest of their time? Or is it this, very active, moderately expensive, new player in the space? So I think if you choose to make the recommendation, all it's really teeing up is A, discussion with your peers, and then B, some further discussion down the road with people that have spent even more time on this.
Move this to the full mayor commission. And then we can have further discussions on staffing. Is that correct? Or like,
They would return with some ideas. So basically, those 5 members would spend a lot of their volunteer BAC time. And they could, to Commissioner Lank's point, they can go talk with other people in this space in Athens and say, well, how would we help and where might we be duplicating what you're already doing?
sounds good?
So, one,
Yeah, I'm still stressed, but I'm trying to think through some of this. My only concern is, like I mentioned earlier, is about, we do this when we try to purchase property. We get into these bidding wars, like that just sort of a little bit of concern for me. I think if I had to guess, if we want to just go ahead and get our land bank back up and running, and Andrew, to your point, maybe not worry about staffing it right now, just sort of get a board together and maybe look at, let them come up with something. Get a board together, look at what it would take if we was gonna establish a department or a land bank, see where we go, at least have get this reactivated. Try to look at some things, so that would be my first suggestion, but I just don't want, I have some angst about when we look at trying to purchase property in the future into, Commissioner Davenport point. Trying to subsidize this stuff and get it to bidding wars. I just don't want us to have the government to be in that position.
And if I can just say, in our conversations with Macomb, Augusta, Richmond, and Fulton County, they said that they don't get into bidding wars with other private entities. They said a lot of times, that they have people come to them wanting them to purchase property.
Okay.
It happened a lot during COVID because they didn't want to have to pay the taxes. And so they wanted them to either hold the property or sell the property and then, decide what they want to do with it later. But they just said they haven't seen a lot of bidding wars at all. They said usually what they may be interested in, someone else is not. Like they're not interested in developing, the student housing and some of the other properties that some people may be interested in.
So we can send it to the format commission just to reactivate the board.
Yeah.
and then there's 2 other things you could consider at this time that are in tandem with the charge. One is, do you want to ask the commission to consider to designate but not allocate any housing funds from this Affordable Housing Special Revenue Fund? Knowing, so if, let's say the Land Bank Committee goes and they meet for 6-9 months and they come back to the commission with a plan and they say, all right, here's our plan. We're gonna work with your inventory. We're gonna get your inventory off the books. We've worked with staff. We've identified these lots. We've actually talked to these housing partners. Here's what we're gonna do. You're still gonna be looking at cost for attorney's fees, accounting, possibly surveyors, things of that nature, and if you're gonna have any staff time. So they may come back to you and say, here's our phase plan, and to do this, we need to use a budget of $100,000 in the first year, and then here's maybe some revenues that we anticipate might be generated or not, if they deeply subsidize the land. So if you were to designate it, there's approximately $750,000 in fund balance now. All it does is put a line item hold in our budgeting documents that says X amount is designated for the Land Bank Authority, which would then decrease available funds. It basically prevents us from accidentally spending the funding twice until it's determined. But they would have to come back to the Mayor and Commission and get your authorization to actually receive funds. So it'd be my recommendation to at least make a designation, even if you made it time bound for, and up to a period of 18 months, we're gonna designate this, and then if they don't come back, designation gone.
What's the second option?
To not designate, which it really just depends on, we'll continue to put this in front of you as you move through budget discussions around affordable housing and the special revenue fund in particular. Though I anticipate that the authority will still come back to you with financial needs. It's just making sure you keep a little powder dry if that's what you intend to do.
Okay.
And so there's that, like a yes, no for the commission. If it's no, then no further action is needed there. And then similarly, do you want to be explicit about charging staff to come back with a plan in partnership with the Land Bank Authority to look at all ACC Gov ownership and a plan to kind of clean our books, if you will?
So what do y'all think, $750,000 with an 18-month
That sounds reasonable.
time limit,
How to do that?
20 usable properties? Or not designate, which means we just have a board and they have to come back to us regardless, right?
I mean,
Yeah, if we wanna do it, department, yeah.
I think having some funds available for that board to access for things like surveying and, those kind of attorney's fees, those kind of preliminary things that need to be done on the ground before any proposal
Okay,
comes up.
Marquita, I know you've looked at budgets, not looking at acquisition, but just on operating and so on. Do you have a sense of scale?
We looked at a lot of the budgets, for different land bank authorities. I think, a lot of them, some of them started with general funds, obviously, for hiring an executive director. So the salary for an executive director, some had funds for office space. We have to determine the location of where the land bank authority would operate out of. It may be something that we already have space for. But most of it, they just, again, really just started with general funds, and then over the years, as they sold properties, those were funds that they utilized for to continue. But they did have an allocation, so we saw anywhere from $250,000 to $500,000,
Sure.
as far as, initial upfront allocations.
So the reason I asked that is 750, you have that ability. It may be a little bit more than you want to put on the table. It's up to you. If I was in your shoes, I would consider something between like 250 and 400, knowing that that's going to be a really good way to seed it out and gives me, if I was on the board, an understanding of how I'm operating. It also leaves you some undesignated funds so that if in budgets or other opportunities come up, you can move nimbly on it.
so 275. Because in housing, can we put them in Dexter Fixer's house, like for their office?
Change. Definitely, I charge you rent.
Can they use government county land or are they up to their own?
So we saw some that shared a county facility as a part of kind of being housed close to government. For us, it's just simply a matter of space and making sure we've got a home for them. But I think there's maybe one or two, at least when they get started, that are more virtual to begin with, it's when they.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they need to come up with a plan
Yeah.
for staffing and operations and all that before
Yeah, I agree.
space
Yeah.
would be determined.
So yeah, I think I like your first option, let's just go ahead and reactivate the board. And then we give them some more marching orders for the staff to try to get this thing off the ground.
So a motion, send to the full, reactivate. And, option 2 of 275 for 18 months to the full mayor and commission.
Okay,
Can I get a second?
I'll second.
All in favor? LBA. Let's move on. And Austin, did you, send us an email on the question of what, worded right?
Yeah, you know what we trying to say.
Yeah.
So the question was about, whether or not, ATC could have would you let the authority or like a third party to sort of be the intermediary between disposing of a particular piece of property?
That, bro.
So If y'all are ready, we can do a kind of a brief overview of where we're at on BACs with hopefully getting closer to a finish line next meeting. Since we last met, we'll pull up the presentation to begin with.
And thank you guys for these, thank y'all.
Yeah, thank y'all.
Yes.
Thank you.
So since we last met, you all surveyed the full Marion Commission about their desire to sunset or combine the existing tier 2 BACs. Kind of narrowed down where we were at, and since then, we have emailed their staff liaisons and their host departments and said, all right, what are some kind of advantages and challenges you might see for this? And then we've also sent a letter to each of those individual BACs, and we gave them slightly more time on their feedback, knowing that they got to catch a meeting cycle. So we do have staff feedback that we can show you. It will be most helpful, I think, when you see that in combination with total feedback. But the other thing that we have done, and shout out to Mr. Montgomery for the help on this, is you know, we have this BAC manual. And so in track changes, we have started to make some of those changes that we discussed. And what I can do, if you'd like, is zoom in and we can kind of just hit some high points here. And what I would recommend is that we send the manual to you. And if so, that way at the next meeting, if you have any questions or additional things you'd like to see, it would be a great time to fold them in. But so there's just a lot of like Scrivener's errors and some light, word editing, and then you'll see. So here's a note about legal counsel, that a few, like ADDA and Classic Center Authority, have their own counsel, but others depend on that as of the attorney's office. And that's going to become important later when we talk about their limited ability to enter into executive session. And then we also,
Hold on. BACs enter?
they can, it's very uncommon, but they
Okay.
can.
All the ones I know of, so the authority, got the hospital authority, possible downtown authority,
Okay.
and maybe the
Or-
health department.
The Board of Elections does.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta talk personnel because what
Right.
they do, but the majority of them, to commission, standpoint, don't. Or they should, because they should be talking personnel, land, and anything else, so.
And then you'll see there are sections that we're recommending being taken out. So here's one on the charge. From somebody who looked at this the first time, I don't know that there was a lot of value add in that to me. Looking at introduction to unified government, I think Jeff asked, is this even needed? And I would argue it helps. So if we retain that, we would add in a section about unification, since that makes us somewhat of a unique government in Athens. And then, so these two sections where they're deleted are actually going to appear somewhere else. So one, again, is about removals, and the other is about different powers that are vested. So one section that we felt would be important to add would be a note about open records, that they are subject to open records. I think that this is not on the radar of many BAC members, especially if they've not undertaken training. Membership limitations. So some changes that we had discussed here is that employees, ACC Gov employees, would not be a member of a BAC unless explicitly authorized in their enabling ordinance. So one example where you would see something like that would be in the pension board or deferred comp board. Each one of those names, an Athens-Clarke County employee is a voting member because employee representation is needed. In other places, it's just our recommendation that we not have employees. Now, they could absolutely be ex officio. So employees are encouraged to engage with BACs, but when it comes to voting on recommendations to you all, there's a mechanism by which staff can make recommendations to you all, and that's through the manager's office. Similarly, attendance. So, and that's going to come up more when we get into language around whether or not you can lose your BAC appointment. Reappointment. So this is one that I definitely wanted to discuss with you all. We talked about an expedited process for reappointment, whether or not to do that. So here's what's proposed here is that if the BAC itself recommends somebody be reappointed. That would come through the commission, and it would go to a standing committee of the mayor, mayor pro tem, and one commissioner appointed by the mayor. So those three individuals would get together and look at the position and the request for reappointment and determine, do we want to go ahead and recommend to the full body reappointment, or do we want to go ahead and make this one part of an all call? And I believe, Jeff, you and I put that for one reappointment.
Yes, we had.
Yeah, so,
That seemed to be
right.
kind of what we heard from you all.
So one reappointment.
So your first reappointment could be expedited, but then, because some of these BACs have 4 or 6 year terms, if you wanted to stay beyond that, you would just begin an open solicitation. You could absolutely apply, assuming that there's a few that actually limit the number of times you can be appointed.
Okay, can you go over the mayor appointed, and mayor pro tem and, one commissioner? So those three individuals
Mhm.
would look at their reappointment and not a standing committee.
Just the first reappointments only, yes. And
So
so the idea
if
is that
passes,
it would keep the volume off the standing committee, but it would still come back to the full commission
That,
as a expedited reappointment.
okay,
It's honestly not terribly different from kind of what happens now with a couple of them where because the BAC would be the one to say, we recommend this.
Mhm.
That's not altogether that different from some of the ones right now that do the recommendations that don't even go to a standing committee first before you vote on it.
okay,
And the goal here was to know whether or not a reappointment was recommended before the position was advertised, because if a reappointment is likely, why go through the effort to do an all-call and bring people in, knowing that it may not be a vacancy there?
that makes sense.
Okay, so this is just, again, these processes with communications aren't really, Jeff, I don't know if you want to speak to this a little bit, but
We just, part of what I'm always looking at when we're doing stuff is try to reduce the size of things. And there was some more specificity in here about how we communicate about items that we sort of felt weren't necessary. We kind of change and ebb and flow based on what kind of distribution outlets we have available at the time when we send out BAC information. So that was just to kind of clean up, which is a lot of this whole process as well.
right. So one of the things we talked about, now we're gonna get into the procedures. When somebody applies for BACs, they can only note 2 interested areas of service. So I couldn't, as a community member, say, oh, I want to serve on all of them. No, just tell us what your top 2 are. One of the things that we also cover in here is that because it's not, if we use not a quorum, that we could do virtual interviews, but that means that you can't use like an existing committee, right? So if this body met and was appointed, that would actually be a quorum of this committee. But if it's worked out between the mayor and commission, the mayor and 3 commissioners are gonna do screening for these groups and other commissioners for others, it can absolutely be done virtual, although it's not obligated. But that's just a way to be more efficiently using people's times. We do still highlight that a couple of these, and I think some of this is gonna depend on, where the conversation lands around consolidation or sunsetting. But right now, there are a number of, BACs that make their own recommendations to the commission. And then there are a couple that are, directed by the mayor. So Tax Allocation District Advisory Committee, there's currently 6 of those. And the ordinance says that the mayor shall appoint. That may be something that as we see the sunsetting and so on, you all might want to make recommendations one way or another. All right, so here's some meatier stuff. How could you be removed? Well, if you move outside of the county and you're required to live in the county. Okay, so that would be an automatic removal. Training, if you don't complete the ACC training within 180 days, then you would automatically be removed. Now, you would get a warning at 90. Absenteeism, so if you fail to attend 3 consecutive meetings or 6 of the last 12, at that point, you're not really there, but in that case, it would be the BAC that votes to remove them. So they wouldn't require further input from the commission, although there is a mechanism there. And then by referral. So if somebody's just acting a fool and not contributing to the BAC, maybe trying to pull it in areas where it's not, the BAC itself could vote to the commission to recommend a reappointment of somebody else, if you will, or an appointment of somebody else. Now that here shows, thought that one was still dependent upon the mayor putting it on the agenda, but no, I think the clerk would just add it in for consideration.
Okay.
Now, since we're proposing some automatic mechanisms around training and absenteeism, there is an opportunity for appeal. So if I'm on a BAC and let's say my kid got sick and I was dealing with some live stuff, but now it's beyond me and somehow I got, unappointed for absenteeism, there is an ability for me to appeal and say, hey, I really am willing to volunteer if you'll give me my spot. And so that is the one that's at the mayor's discretion. Basically, I would send a letter to the mayor asking for a variance or a reconsideration. And if the mayor put it on the agenda, then the mayor and commission would hear
So explain that, the mayor and commission were here, should be like a hearings board?
it. No, it would just be an item on the agenda. Do we restore Andrew's appointment to
Okay.
6 on the planning commission kind of deal?
Would there be, would there be like personnel executive session discussion about that? Is that open, is that qualify for that?
I don't know.
I mean.
Personnel section?
Yeah,
Personnel exception for the appointment of BEC members?
yeah.
So we talked about that in the past, and I could certainly provide some prior memos, but I think that because the personnel exception is arguably intended for like the manager, like higher levels of appointment, I would not feel comfortable using it for BAC members, but I can certainly share that more off.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it coming up before. It just seems kind of sketchy to have those conversations and.
Is that, use of non-government email, can that be, a mechanism for termination or then taken off?
It certainly could for some BACs. I mean, I think that there's some that have a separate level of authority that might be hard. I'm thinking of board of elections, tax assessors. But, all your regular sort of citizen advisory bodies that you all have created, you could absolutely make it a requirement for use an email and a work email. And that there could be justification for why you would remove someone for not using it, primarily because of the concern related to open records, retaining records. I think it can be challenging for an average citizen to understand that emails that they receive related to their work are in fact government records and that we have to be able to have access to them.
Yeah,
We do say several times in here that you are required again for those that we feel we can require to do it, that you're supposed to do it.
And what I would recommend if you want to add that provision is that maybe that not be an automated one, but be one that's by referral from the BFD. Like Andrew never checks his email and we're tired of it. Okay. So, yeah, they still choose their own officers, staff liaisons. As we talked about, there would be an orientation and training. We would do that through our learning management system. So that would need to be developed, but I think it's certainly important given the number of staff we have in that
So
function.
I do have a question, so all the many BACs we have, so some of the bylaws are different versus this training, from the user manual. So will this supersede their, let's say like solid waste advisory, they have their own mechanism for disposing of and meeting. I'm just using that as an example. So will this supersede their bylaws, solid waste advisory commission?
That's a really good question. So bylaws, generally speaking, are intended to be created by the body to govern the body.
Yeah,
I think you would have to think about how how you would want to implement this, but certainly you all could create an ordinance, for example, that says all boards, authorities, commissions, again, with a big asterisk for those that have some separate authority, but that, boards, authorities, commissions created by the commission are required to follow these rules.
Okay.
And that would absolutely supersede their bylaws.
Okay.
If this policy is adopted by the mayor and commission as an update, do you feel like that is strong enough to say?
I haven't thought about that. I think it would be clearer if it was an ordinance. And I would hope we wouldn't have problems with boards not wanting to follow the established policies, but I think to future-proof it and to be as careful as you could after doing all this work, I would suggest that there be an ordinance, similar to how the purchasing manual is just mentioned as in the ordinance. Doesn't have to be that this is codified, just a reference to the manual that's been adopted.
Yeah. Orientation and training, so updating that because it's not done in person, but then having this note that you have 180 days to complete it with kind of a heads up notification at 90 days. And you will need an ACC Gov email to complete that training just because of the way it functions.
So why the 180 days? It seems like a long time, like.
I think mostly because we had an automatic removal, and so you want to give a decent amount of time, but it could be less,
I mean, I guess some of the trainings aren't available that frequently. Is that part of it,
Well,
or?
they're virtual, but what I will say, because this came up at another meeting, here where we discussed this a little bit, and I think where we had a little bit of concern about, say, 90 days was that this is not a short training. Like, it's several hours of training that is involved with that. And with that automatic, we just felt it was a little bit of a concern on a 3-month process. If it's happened to be right over summer or something like that, that could be a challenge. So, I mean, obviously, we're prepared to do whatever you all want to on that, but that was some of the rationale of 90 versus 180.
Yeah, like, family take vacations and,
Like today, I think that is
6 months?
reasonable to, because they have to put it on their own time.
And I think also with some of them that, may not meet for a couple of months for a period of time. Again, it's not dependent on that, but to Andrew's point, because of some of the automatic provisions, we want to at least give them, and they'll get that warning too. So hopefully that would help as well.
There was no reference to stipends, and I think this body will still need to decide if you want to let stipends go as they have been, which was kind of ad hoc, or if you want to have a unified approach. But what we do say, regardless of that, is that it would be maximum of 1 per regularly scheduled meeting per month, and it's not eligible for staff, ex officios, or elected officials to receive them.
so, in this, in my notes, I think it will be a budget impact from our December meeting, November meeting of 75 grand. Is that correct?
It was, yeah, I should have that here.
I think these people are volunteering, using their time, that, $25 per meeting. Cause like, police, what else get paid? Election get paid, and I just think it'll be fair for everybody. But
Peace Corps,
Peace Club,
they get paid.
but, like, what if a person is serving on 2 boards? Do you think that's?
Well, if you remember, this policy is being edited to say that a person cannot serve on 2 boards.
Okay.
Just one.
So would you
But
like,
currently though,
Depending on what we're gonna keep, do we want to take a look? And if everybody serves on board, get compensated and see what that look like from a budget standpoint or not? Should we take a look at this sheet?
yeah,
Is that what we just had?
yeah, so this is some of again, this is tier 2, so locally created and controlled. And their existing membership, so again, you've got all of your TAD advisory committees here. If you choose to make that one TAD advisory committee, it gets cheaper. And then similarly, you've got a couple of those ARPA committees that you're gonna sunset, but in this worst case scenario, it would be approximately $80,000 if you did $25 per person per meeting.
Okay.
So I think if you want to go ahead and recommend that or not, you know, but I guess we were waiting to see where y'all were gonna land on consolidation.
Yeah, and that's,
And maybe we should consolidate tags.
but once we consolidate, I think that's something we just maybe take up and see, should we compensate?
And is there consensus here around the
Yeah, I agree with
$25?
Are y'all okay with, compensating, people that serve on the base fee?
Yeah.
I also seem to recall there was some conversation about the frequency of doing that. Maybe that's something we talk about.
Whether it's done quarterly or.
Or annually, something like that, as opposed to each month.
Each month.
And they'd have to submit some kind of invoice to indicate who actually showed up to the meetings.
Well, I would think there.
It'd be in the minutes.
It should be in the minutes.
So
What
would
we say
the
is they
clerk
don't show up
be
for the meeting,
responsible
then they come.
for submitting that to finance to get the payments out?
We did Vision probably the
Liaisons.
Heather.
And it happens right now with two of the departments I'm involved with, the Board of Elections and people in belonging, each have stipends they pay. I think they would probably appreciate it if we said that it was paid quarterly, because it just cuts down on the
Yeah.
administrative side.
I was on the Board of Health and we got the quarterly check.
So we'll go ahead and plan that in there, and then that'll be something that'll need to be in a report when y'all send this to Mayor and Commission. Social media, so this is another big change. It really wasn't referenced in the prior policy, and here's what it says is that our preference is that you use existing ACC Gov accounts before you go on your own branded social media adventures, because what tends to happen is that they become stagnant and not really that active. However, if they want to request that one, it would come to Communications Department, who would consult with the manager's office and establish if an account is needed. If an account is needed, ACC Gov through Communications would be the owner of that account. And the liaison would be the person who does it. And the BAC would then direct the liaison what they wanted to put on there. And have their own policy. So I'll be quite frank, we would prefer BACs not have social media, period.
How about that?
On the side where you say you don't like it.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, we ain't got the all desk so this is where we're at, but if you wanted to say no social media unless, I think, I don't know, do we know how many have them now?
Yeah.
There's not that many that do, there are a handful, again, you know, like, Coney River Greenway Commission has some, ACAC has some.
Athens in Motion.
Athens in Motion has some. Those are the three offhand.
Council and Keep Athens-Clarke County Beautiful, but those are nonprofit.
So, well, the tree council
They haven't.
sort of hasn't, well, and this is kind of to illustrate this, you know, I've been in the social media sphere for quite a while and in the website sphere, and what we see happen is stuff gets created and then it's not used for years, and then it gets reestablished for a month or two, and then it goes away. And so I think the tree council right now doesn't have anything.
Well, they have a Facebook page, but they have not, the person who was the one who was updating is no longer on the council.
Which therein
Been
lies
that
the
way.
problem.
But there's somebody on the council now that has volunteered to start
Sure.
taking that. And with those, I mean, we had a discussion about this in the tree council meeting last week. Those are nonprofits, like they are tasked with raising funds to carry out their mission, to keep ACC clean and beautiful and the tree council. And so they kind of could use that social media presence to promote some of these fundraising.
So is the tree council is a nonprofit, a separate nonprofit? I actually didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just kind of like occurred to me recently that those kind of exist separately from the
Well,
typical
if-
BAC.
And that could be an exemption.
If we wanted to, we could mirror what's in websites here, which says you must use ACC stuff unless you're granted a waiver by the manager's office. So right now, the meatiest and most likely to retain external BAC website is the ACAC, Athens Arts.
Yeah.
And it's because they have a lot of visual stuff and they've spent a lot of time. And so I would say, I would recommend to the manager to let it stay. But for example, if at one point the tree council had their own website, if they came forward and said, we'd really like our own website, I would need to hear a convincing argument of what are they looking for that our website can't do? Like, are they really getting the
So
function?
the conversation that's happening is fundraising, being
Right.
able to vend and sell things that would actually help
So
support the.
no to website.
Although I will say KACCB does that currently through our site.
Oh, they do.
We don't have part of the reason, sometimes this is a little off topic, but sometimes some of the reason that we don't have a .gov is to allow more flexibility and things like that.
So what are your thoughts on social media? I would prefer all of that to be handled internally, just for slippage or somebody may have a bad day. And
Yeah, I think it's best if the staff liaison be the one who's in
Yeah.
charge of those social media accounts.
Can I chime in really quickly? I just want to share, I think this actually illustrates a really important point, which is that nonprofit entities that support the government need to be as separate as we can make them. And I realize Keep Athens-Clarke County Beautiful is a very different animal. But think about like Sandy Creek Nature Center Inc. versus Sandy Creek Nature Center, like we need to actually keep those boundaries because we also don't want to preference one set of nonprofits over another, although obviously it is a bit different when you have a nonprofit that directly supports a park, but compare like Sorba, for example. The other thing I will share, just because this has come up, is although I know that the Tree Council says it's a nonprofit and they have a 501c3 status letter, I have not notified any corporation listed in Georgia for them. So I think there is some question as to what their legal status is or how they got that, that probably needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, it would be helpful to find out what the status is, because I think there is question on the tree council itself, as how that functions within the government and as advisory to the government.
Okay, so on the meeting front, we've added some language about streaming. Consistent with what we're handling now.
So
Your comments are coming.
I've
Sorry.
zoom in just a little bit more.
His comments, Andrew.
So I thought Georgia state law requires only written submitted meeting minutes.
Correct.
So you don't have to do the owl.
It is not a legal requirement.
But here we are saying it's legally required.
No,
No,
we're
it
saying
says it's
although
not
not
legally
required.
required. It's still required by us generally.
Except doing emergency declarations. Okay.
And actually, I wrote that, so they may need to review that sentence, but generally speaking, yes. Because we want to point out that it's not, occasionally we've had a technical issue and something hasn't done and say, I mean, that happens. It's not streaming is not a legal requirement. The minutes, the agendas, meeting summaries, those are clearly legal requirements and we do those.
What are your thoughts on consistency across the BACs though? Like.
For the streaming?
Yeah.
Well, and that's a discussion that we've all sort of had internally. Is it better to leave it up to the BACs to decide? Is it better to do it across the board? Ultimately, I don't know that we can answer that question. I can see kind of both sides to that. We obviously, I point out to somebody, pre-COVID, we streamed about 24 meetings annually. Post-COVID, we stream about 300 with all the BACs that, we have the mechanisms to do it. So I think we've, come out of that with the operational responsibility and communications to help provide that for folks. So I think ultimately there's something to be said for consistency for sure. There are some BACs that I think we'll probably hear from in the comments that feel that it's another sort of burden on them to do that, and that the minutes and agendas should suffice. I don't know, Andrew, I don't know if you want to add anything more to that, but I mean, I think we're kind of like whatever the commission prefers.
I mean, at this point, Isn't it our policy that all tier twos screen?
It's essentially a policy from the manager's office that they should.
But it's something that we could go a different way. I think what I'm seeing is that most folks are kind of getting used to it.
I just know some of these organizations, BAC, they struggle with setting it up, getting it started. And I'm quite sure it's taxing on staff, so.
I mean, and I think that's one of the reasons we try to emphasize that it's not legally required, because, unfortunately, a lot of these BACs happen after hours.
Yeah.
And as we've sort of repeatedly said, like, communications does a lot of IT stuff, but we're not really IT. We just happen to know it well. But when you have the meetings at 6 and 7 and stuff, it's very difficult sometimes for us to do tech support. This at least kind of says, look, we try to provide, we have instructional videos, we have instructional one sheets, we've done a lot of instruction. And we've said, if you do it on Wi-Fi, you're kind of rolling the dice a little more than if you're plugging into the system. So try to use, Athens-Clarke County facilities versus not other outside places, because we can't really help in that regard. And so I think our take on it is that if that happens, it happens. If it's 6:30 and we've said, try a little bit early, give us a call, but if we're gone, and you can't do it, you can't do it. And so that's kind of how we've tried to approach that, because it can be a challenge for us to try to figure out. And WebEx, updates sometimes on its own. And, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that has to go on with it, but some are, are so into it now, they just kind of are able to do it easily, so.
So long as that DACs understand that as long as they're submitting the meeting minutes, that legally, they're good.
Okay. So here's where we've added some stuff around executive session. It was already in there about the places they could, but we've said that any BAC that intends to enter executive session needs to notify the attorney's office so that we can be sure that they're being legal. Because even today, you heard us discuss, well, it's discussing BAC, a personnel matter. There's nuance, and we want to be sure that we're covering everything we should.
And the same rules apply, 24-hour notice, all that fun stuff.
Depending on the type of meeting, but yes, all at a bare minimum.
Okay. Okay.
And we do have some of that information in the checklist that we send to liaisons to remind them if it's this kind of meeting, put it up this early, that kind of thing.
So again, using our website for public notice, quorum. So this is one I see our BAC struggle with a lot, which is your quorum is of your total membership, period. Doesn't matter how many vacancies you have, and virtual attendees don't count. So that's something we'll continue to stress too.
And that virtual attendees are only in the same sort of limited circumstances as for you all. That's something that we also have had to educate about.
Approval minutes, so that's again mostly housekeeping. Conflict of interest is mostly things resolving, and then here's what we're proposing. So right now, the next 20-something pages are individual snapshots of each BAC. This is now housed on the clerk section of the website, so that's probably the best place to keep it, because things like the staff liaison or membership change and you don't want to kind of revisit this. So what we're proposing is that we would strike all of these, and I won't go through every one of them. And instead, we would just have an appendix that lists these various BACs that exist as of the time of this policy. So that's the direction we're heading. What we'll do is clean this up a little bit and send it to you all. And it's really pending this last part of this discussion, which is how do y'all want to manage those tier twos? And we'll have that information for you ahead of the next meeting. I'd say the staff feedback we've gotten, I know we're coming towards the end of our 1:30, so I don't know that we want to dive into it, but none of it is surprising. So there's, keep Athens-Clarke County beautiful, really wanted to be sure, and we'll share it all with you, but to note that they're part of a nationwide organization and program, and so it's challenging to merge them one way or another. generally there was support for merging, the TAD committees. There was some benefits to formalizing, SPLOST, T-SPLOST as a single mayor and commission appointed BAC instead of just two standing mayors committees. So those are some of the quick hitters on that.
And we cannot change the ordinance to stop the mayor from creating more BAC.
You change the charter.
The charter.
Charter, okay.
I mean, that's kind of like the standard role of a mayor type figure in any small government is to appoint committees, advisory committees.
But sometimes Kelly's name, Oprah, you get a BAC.
Like task force or advisory committees, I mean, that's kind of like a necessary function.
So this policy does say that when you can't serve on two BACs, that includes mayor's committees. But if you were appointed, if the mayor wanted to appoint you to a committee and you were already on the hearings board, if you wanted to take that appointment, you would need to resign your spot on the hearings board.
Like, it's helpful to have people who might have some specific, other advisory committee experience to be on some of these ad hoc advisory committees that pop up. Like, I think often it's helpful to have a planning commissioner on a temporary advisory committee, someone who's aware of
Yeah.
land use policy. Like, I kind of feel like that no more than two should not apply to these temporary ad hoc and task force mayor appointed committees, because often they pop up for very, very specific purposes that are temporary.
I need to take more on that one. So the the BAC that you just presented, that's the user manual.
Correct.
That's on the website?
It is on the website, but the one on the website is the
No.
non-edited version.
Right. So what we're proposing is that you all would send a revised user manual to the mayor and commission for consideration. And that would catch all of these changes, and then you all will decide whether or not you want to recommend, certain changes to tier 2 structure. So one of the things that y'all said in a prior meeting was that you wanted to formalize the vision committee as a mayor and commission committee. Which strangely enough functions as one now, just doesn't have an enabling ordinance that we're aware of. So we're gonna try to land that ship on the next run, and then those would be brought to the mayor and commission as concepts. So we conceptually, this group wants to take the 6 TADs to 1. We'll get your peers to give a yes, no, and then if they give a yes, it'll return to staff in the attorney's office to work on ordinances to do it.
Okay. And also we talked about like the 17, some of these BAC that got 17 members, shrinking them. We had that discussion. Did we also talk about that next month as well? Or why, since we got a month, should we look at those BACs and think about shorting them?
So a couple of the ones, let's say over 10, Human Relations Commission, ACAC has 11, Tree Council has 15, Keep Beautiful has 20, Greenway Commission has 15. The ARPA ones y'all are recommending go away. And then the Commission on People with Disabilities would be 30. So the only one that if you were to look at maybe setting a maximum of 10, you could, again, that would be back to the staff liaisons and the attorney's office and the BACs probably to figure out how are they gonna get from 20 to 10. And then come back to you all. The one you might want to exclude would be that overview commission, because it, meets once a decade to check the charter kind of deal.
So what about, considering allowing some of the BACs to appoint their members, like some of them already do?
So right now in the policy manual, it still keeps that the ones who appoint their own members they don't appoint, they make recommendations to you
Well,
all.
I mean, like, if we expand, like, I feel like the library board would be a really good candidate to be able to.
They're set by ordinance.
Okay.
No, sorry, it's by state law.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, they're very separate.
okay.
Yeah, I think they're not considered one of our tier 2s on
They're
there.
not.
Right.
But there's other ones.
Alrighty.
So do y'all have thoughts about setting a cap on membership, or you wanna play it by ear and wait until you see what the,
Melissa, do you know, because I know for a long time, the tree council was having a really difficult time
Yeah.
filling seats. Do you know what their number's at now?
I think we got the seats filled.
Okay.
We got another member seated this past meeting, although I don't know, I don't think we had, we did get quorum by halfway through. There, I mean, the thing with the tree council is there's a lot of ex officio members, myself and several staff members who don't have a vote and aren't considered as part of the quorum.
That are part of that 20?
no, that 20 is
I think
keep
that's
Athens-Clarke County beautiful.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, was it 15?
The 15 does not, it only includes one staff member who's the
Yeah.
community forester, named in ordinance as their secretary.
So, yeah, so the ex officios wouldn't count on.
Right, so the,
So, yeah, we need to, cause I mean, Athens is a lovely volunteer town, but just 15 people on a board, that's just, come on, like, it's ridiculous. 5, 10, maybe,
I mean, whittling it down could help.
Yeah.
Quorum.
and for selection and, how many are in TADs?
7 per tad and there's 6 tads,
Well, I just, okay, 7, okay,
so 42.
But I do know they've had some challenges with quorum,
yeah.
even with 7 people.
Why did we choose 7?
I think those were ones that started as mayor advisory and then were incorporated into ordinance.
Yeah, I can't remember which came first, but it was set in ordinance. And I imagine 7 is just considered generally a reasonable size number to have representation, but
And probably also, you don't have ties in voting.
that's right.
Okay,
I mean, the thing about the TADs is they were designed so they could be very area specific.
yeah,
And so the idea of combining them might mean that if, you're considering a TAD project in one TAD, you might not have anybody from that area on that combined committee to have input. So I think that would have to be something that's carefully considered in any ordinance that would combine the TAD committees, that would specify that members should represent each of the TAD areas.
okay, well, I mean, so, well, in a minute, we're gonna do a motion to adjourn. And, and Commissioner Link did bring up a point about ad hoc. We'll look into that for our next meeting, but for our next meeting, we need to read the BAC manual, correct? In this case, we wanna add any extra fun stuff or any questions,
Yeah,
and,
I will send you the link to the right one on that.
and also we need to streamline and did you, 6 text, and I think that's it. Anything else? For our next meeting? All right, motion to adjourn. All in favor? Happy St. Patrick's Day. Y'all pinch, Mr. Saunders.